Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. What we are witnessing right now could be one of the most dramatic shifts in modern geopolitics. Kazakhstan has launched a series of strikes against Russian targets, sending shockwaves through the region and across the world. The headlines are roaring with disbelief as reports confirm that this is not a small border skirmish or an isolated act of defense. This is a calculated and coordinated effort that challenges decades of Russian dominance over its former Soviet neighbors. As the news unfolds, it's clear that Moscow's long-held dream of a united Eurasian sphere is beginning to crumble, and this move by Kazakhstan might be the moment history remembers as the turning point. The situation is unfolding rapidly, with images of burning supply lines, destroyed command posts, and disrupted communication channels flooding social media. The world is stunned. Analysts are scrambling to understand Kazakhstan's endgame, and Vladimir Putin's government is facing one of its most serious geopolitical threats since the start of the Ukraine war. From an exterior perspective, the scale of Kazakhstan's offensive is remarkable. The strikes were focused on Russian logistics hubs and military installations near the border, disrupting Moscow's southern defense infrastructure. This region has long been considered stable, a buffer zone that Russia believed was under its quiet influence. Yet overnight, Kazakhstan has transformed that perception by demonstrating a readiness to act decisively. Satellite imagery shows precision attacks on radar systems, fuel depots, and rail junctions used by the Russian army to support its operations further west. The sudden nature of these strikes caught Russian forces off guard, and the efficiency of the attacks suggests that Kazakhstan's military has been planning and preparing for this moment for months, if not years. The decision to go on the offensive marks a profound shift in Central Asia's power dynamic. For decades, Kazakhstan has carefully balanced itself between Russia and the West, maintaining ties with both, but never directly opposing Moscow. Now the balance is broken. This is more than a military move. It's a declaration of sovereignty, a bold statement that Kazakhstan will no longer operate under the shadow of Russian influence. Inside Kazakhstan, the atmosphere is intense but unified. Government officials have released statements emphasizing that the strikes were a defensive necessity, a preemptive action to protect. The performance of Kazakhstan's military in this operation has been unexpectedly strong. Despite being seen as a secondary power in the region, Kazakhstan has proven that its forces are far more capable than previously assumed. The precision of drone strikes, the speed of troop mobilization, and the coordination between air and ground units point to a high level of strategic preparation. Experts are now questioning whether Kazakhstan received external assistance, possibly in the form of Western intelligence or advanced military technology. The use of next-generation drones and satellite-guided missiles indicates a leap in capability that cannot be explained by domestic development alone. This performance has sent a shockwave through Russia's defense establishment. After struggling in Ukraine, Moscow is now facing another military front, and the prospect of dealing with two active conflicts simultaneously is stretching its capabilities thin. Russian analysts appearing on state television are already calling for restraint, fearing that a prolonged confrontation with Kazakhstan could open the door to further instability across Russia's vast southern borders. Safety remains a critical concern. With both sides now on high alert, the risk of escalation is enormous. Kazakhstan has fortified its northern regions, deploying air defense systems and preparing shelters in case of Russian retaliation. There are reports of cyber attacks targeting Kazakhstan's communication networks, likely orchestrated by Russian intelligence units attempting to disrupt command and control operations. In response, Kazakhstan's security forces have increased cybersecurity measures and moved some of their communications to encrypted satellite networks. For civilians, safety warnings have been issued across major cities, urging people to avoid border areas and stay prepared for possible disruptions, i.e., utilities or transport. Meanwhile, Russia has moved several battalions closer to the frontier, and local governors have declared states of emergency in nearby regions. International observers from the United Nations and NATO have begun monitoring the situation closely, warning that any further escalation could have consequences beyond Central Asia. The possibility of accidental clashes or misinterpretation of military signals could spark a much larger conflict than either side anticipates. What makes this entire situation unique is the timing and symbolism. Kazakhstan's move is not only a strike against Russia's military assets, but also a direct challenge to Putin's vision of restoring Soviet-era influence. For years, Moscow has portrayed itself as the unshakable power of the region, but Kazakhstan's defiance exposes how fragile that image has become. The country has shown that Russia's sphere of control is no longer absolute, and that smaller nations are beginning to push back. This act of resistance could inspire others, nations like Georgia, Moldova, or even Belarus, to reconsider their own positions in relation to Moscow. The psychological effect is just as significant as the physical damage. Putin's empire, once built on fear and intimidation, is now showing cracks from within. Every successful Kazakh operation weakens Russia's narrative of dominance and emboldens others. Adding to this unprecedented situation is the surprise announcement from the European Union. Within hours of the strikes, the EU revealed a new multi-billion-dollar package of financial and military aid for Ukraine. This was not expected, and the timing could not have been more strategic. Analysts believe the EU's decision was influenced by Kazakhstan's move, aiming to exploit Russia's growing vulnerability. By bolstering Ukraine's resources while Russia is distracted by a new front, the West is effectively surrounding Moscow with simultaneous pressures. Billions in new funding will enable Ukraine to strengthen its defenses, repair damaged infrastructure, and potentially launch new counteroffensives before winter sets in. The coordination between Kazakhstan's sudden offensive and the EU's financial strike appears to be part of a broader, more synchronized effort to weaken Russia on all fronts, militarily, economically, and politically. For Putin, this combination of attacks and sanctions feels like an encirclement, a tightening ring that he can no longer control. The price of this confrontation is immense. Kazakhstan may face harsh retaliation from Russia, economically, politically, and even militarily. Moscow could impose trade embargoes, restrict energy exports, or attempt cyber warfare to destabilize Kazakhstan's economy. Yet Kazakhstan's leadership seems prepared for these consequences. Over the past few years, the government has been diversifying trade partnerships with China, Turkey, and the European Union to reduce dependency on Russia. That foresight might now prove crucial. Energy prices are already reacting to the conflict. Oil futures are climbing as traders fear disruptions to pipelines that pass through Kazakhstan and Russia. The Eurasian economic landscape is shifting before our eyes, with investors reassessing risks and governments recalculating their alliances. Russia, already burdened by sanctions due to the Ukraine war, is now facing an even deeper economic crisis. Inflation is climbing, international reserves are thinning, and foreign investors are fleeing. The ruble is under pressure again, and the prospect of another major conflict could drive it further into freefall. As the crisis deepens, the human cost is also beginning to surface. Border villages are being evacuated, families are relocating, and humanitarian organizations are preparing for potential refugee flows. Kazakhstan has opened temporary shelters in several southern cities, while Russia's border regions are seeing an exodus of civilians fearing retaliatory shelling. The international community is calling for restraint, but the situation is moving too quickly for diplomacy to catch up. The United Nations has urged both sides to de-escalate and open communication channels, yet neither seems ready to back down. Kazakhstan's president has stated that his nation will defend its sovereignty by any means necessary, and the Kremlin, though cautious in its response, is unlikely to let such an act go unanswered. The fear of a broader regional war is now very real, and it's drawing comparisons to the early days of the Ukraine conflict. From a broader performance standpoint, Russia's once feared military machine is now facing a new test. After years of boasting about its strength, the Russian army is stretched thin, its resources depleted by the prolonged conflict in Ukraine. The strikes from Kazakhstan have exposed vulnerabilities in Russia's southern defense network that few thought possible. Reports suggest that several key radar stations were disabled and logistical hubs disrupted, limiting Russia's ability to coordinate operations effectively. This growing list of setbacks has shaken confidence within the Russian population, where patriotic rhetoric is giving way to frustration and fatigue. Online forums and independent Russian media, those still operating, are flooded with criticism of the government's handling of the crisis. Putin's image as a strong leader capable of restoring Russia's glory is being undermined by the very neighbors he once considered loyal. Yet, despite the chaos, there's a sense of transformation in the air. Kazakhstan's defiance represents something far larger than a military confrontation. It symbolizes a breaking of chains. After decades of political dependency, this move stands as a message to the world. Central Asia is no longer under the Kremlin's control. The echoes of this decision will resonate across borders and through generations. Putin's empire, once feared, now looks fragile, weakened from both external pressure and internal disillusionment. Every strike that lands on Russian soil chips away at the illusion of invincibility that Moscow has maintained for years. The geopolitical map of Eurasia is being redrawn, and Kazakhstan's decision might very well be remembered as the spark that set the transformation in motion. The conclusion emerging from this fast-changing situation is both hopeful and dangerous. On one hand, Kazakhstan's courage has awakened a sense of possibility for smaller nations long oppressed by larger powers. On the other, it risks plunging the region into an era of instability. The European Union's massive aid to Ukraine, Kazakhstan's defiance, and Russia's growing desperation form a triangle of tension that could reshape alliances and redraw borders. Economically, politically, and militarily, we are entering uncharted territory. The coming weeks will determine whether this crisis can be contained or whether it becomes the next great conflict of our time. One thing is certain. The age of Russian dominance in its former territories is fading. The empire that once ruled through fear is now struggling to maintain control. The world is witnessing a shift that could define the next generation of global politics, and as the dust settles, Kazakhstan's name will be etched into history as the nation that dared to stand against a crumbling empire.